Hey, Wes here. This is the part 3 of the primitive pottery firing series. And in this episode, I am going to be refiring this pot. I fired it the first time and it turned out okay, but I had a bunch of smoke clouds and things on it that I thought could look better if I refired it. So in this video, I will show the entire firing process. I do it a little bit differently. I'm also adding sherds on top of the pot. But because the last video got so long, in this particular one, anytime that I'm not speaking, I am speeding it up ×4. So it all goes a little bit more quickly, hopefully a little bit more interesting for you. And then at the end of the video, in celebration of coming close to having 1,000 subscribers, I will give you more information about how I'm going to give this shoe pot away, which was fired in episode 2, as well as giving away a bunch of these stickers. So let's get started. Here's another way to create a primary fire. I'm just using some charcoal. Let that burn down until it turns gray. The downside of this is that you really can't use this primary fire for preheating your pot very well. I actually have the pot inside in the oven, so in this case it will give me nice even heat and should work pretty well. To create good airflow, in this case what I've done is take a piece of an expanded metal and then elevate it on some old bricks above the primary fire, and then I'll put my pot on top of that. I will protect the pot with a sherd on the top because sometimes the metal will leave an imprint on the pot. Just went out to the woods and picked this wood up. What you look for ideally is a tree that is clearly dead. It should never have any leaves on it. Even if the leaves are brown, the wood's probably still a little bit green. So wood that is clearly dead. Ideally it's a tree that hasn't fallen over yet. But if it's on the ground, ideally it's off the ground a little bit. And then you want to make sure, this is pretty tough stuff. You want to ensure that it snaps. This is very dry wood. Sometimes you'll see the bark has fallen off. That's a good thing, it's cracked. But when you break it, it just kind of mushy and doesn't snap, it means it started to rot. And at that point, I wouldn't use it. But all of this looks like it's pretty good. Now, what I don't know is whether this species is going to work very well. This is a type of ironwood, I believe. I'm not really familiar with it for firing, but I think it's going to be fine. You can see too, this is about as big a piece as I have. You don't need very large pieces of wood. It's going to be a fast, hot fire. So the charcoal has preheated. I have my buckets of wood all ready to go. It should be enough. Some lighter fluid and matches. So everything is prepared. So the next step for me is just to go inside and get my pot out of the oven. Okay, here's the pot. I've got it upside down. I'm going to use cover sherds now because there's a lot of painting on the other side and I want to protect that to the extent that I can. Okay, I think that's as good as it's going to need to be. So now the plan is to loosely stack wood. Hopefully I have enough. This is a big pot. I have smaller pieces and bigger pieces. This is refiring, so it doesn't really need to be as hot because it is ceramic already. Mostly what I'm trying to do is clean it up a little bit. You end up with a really smoky fire to begin with, and your pot comes out all gray. It means it didn't get hot enough and didn't oxidize. And so you can refire. Now, you may not have the outcome you want. It could break. Firing is always a little bit risky, but if it's been fired once already, it's already achieved some level of ceramic hardness. And so then it tends to be more resilient the next time around. It's kind of like bisque firing. Usually I would say my fires are not as tall as this. They're more flat probably. It has partly to do with just how long this wood ended up being, and also it's a big pot. So I'm going to end up using 2 5-gallon buckets full of wood, loosely filled. That's more than you would probably need most of the time, because in this case it's a pretty big pot. So one small pot, maybe 1 bucket worth of wood would be enough. What I've tried to do though is loosely stack the wood so that there's quite a bit of air. Now I've got quite a few sherds in there, and that may be a bit of a problem. I don't know, we'll see. So I'm going to call that good. That's what I've got. And so tuck some paper in some of the gaps. Sometimes the fire will get started on its own just from the preheating coals. I tend to work kind of quickly with these things. You can see the smoke is blowing away a little bit, so there's a little bit of a breeze, but my guess is 5 miles an hour this morning, which is usually not a problem. Give it a little more encouragement. A little bit of a breeze is nice because it gives you more airflow, a little more oxygen. But the downside is that you can have one side of the fire warmer than the other side. And then the fire burns unevenly. So this, you can see this side over here is not burning up very well, so I'm going to add a little kindling. Hopefully get this going a little bit quicker over here. Small pieces of wood burn easier, obviously, than big pieces of wood. Give that some encouragement too. We're now 6 minutes into the fire. So you can see what it looks like all the way around. I would say, sorry for a shaky camera, but the fire is pretty even Over on this side, it's not going so much on the bottom. Maybe I'll add a couple of pieces down there. You can see though how I added kindling right here and that got that going. So my inside pot is 625 Celsius. These little infrared heat guns can really be useful. There's 700 in there. So I'm pretty happy with this. $770. When you're using sherds like this, you need a little bit more fire because you're heating up the sherds as well as the pot, and the sherds protect the pot, so you kind of have to get through them to create heat inside of the fire, or inside of the firing, so your inside pot gets fired as well. Pretty consistent temperatures of 750, and I'm now 11 minutes into the firing. So at this point I can see the fire is starting to cool down, but it's kind of hit this oxidation phase where it should really burn off any carbon residue on the pot. Kind of look for that point of where the wood is all turned gray and there's not much black to it anymore. And if you see too, there's really no smoke, or not very much. There is some kind of down right towards the very bottom, but not in the main fire itself. Let's take a look. So the fire is largely burned down. Certainly it's cooling off. It fired reasonably evenly around. Sorry for the amateur camera work here. I did not hear any pops or pings during the process. If you do, usually that happens at the beginning of the firing, and it means that your pot is either cracking or spalling. Oftentimes it means that anyway. And that can come from the pot not be totally dry. It could be that you didn't have enough temper. It could be that the pot was made unevenly. If you have real thick areas and thin areas. Those differences can cause stresses. It could be that you have really uneven fire, and so it's oftentimes unevenness that causes those problems. Sometimes I pull away wood once it's kind of at this point. If it is smoking at all, you can have a nice clean fire, but then if in the end you end up with a smoldering fire with a lot of smoke, that can contaminate your pot again. Or if you have wood that's not totally fired, turned to ashes, and that touches your pot, it'll create black spots on your pot. And sometimes, those are smoke clouds or fire clouds, and those can be desirable, can look really nice. So I see my camera has been running this last time for 17.5 minutes. This fire is done. I'm just gonna let it cool off by itself. I don't want it. Normally at this point, depending on what you want out of your pot, you could probably start removing some of these sherds, but it does increase some chance of getting a cold burst of air and cracking your pot. Probably best just to let it sit and cool off. And usually if the pot is about 100 degrees Celsius, I figure it's fine. Nothing more is going to happen. And they're hot to handle because I think that's 300 degrees or so. So I'm going to turn off the camera and just let this cool off, and I'll come back. The pot is about 300 Celsius. And I want things to kind of cool down. So I'm going to go ahead and remove some of these sherds. I will wait a little bit before I flip it over, but the bottom's certainly cleaned up more than what it was before. So far, so good. It's still solid. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with the way this turned out. I had a bunch of smoke clouds on the bottom, and they cleaned up real well. So hopefully you found some usefulness in this three-part series on firing primitive pottery. As promised, here's how to win this culinary shoe pot that made in Andy Ward's Ancient Pottery Club. All I need to do is put a comment down below, and your name will automatically go into a random drawing. And you can do that in the first two videos of this series as well. And in celebration of hopefully getting to 1,000 subscribers, I'm giving away a bunch of these stickers. In this case, I need to know where to send it. So send me an email at airstreamwanderings@gmail.com, and I'll send out as many of these as I can. And I will be deleting all of those names and addresses, so it should be secure. So thanks again so much. Please leave comments, questions. Maybe you have things to add that would be useful. I'll try to respond to everything that I can. And until next time, I'm wishing you health, happiness, peace, and love. Take care. Bye-bye.